Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's Select Science webinar titled Efficiency Redefined, Navigating Automated Sample Management for Improved Lab Performance. My name is Lawrence Howes, and I'll be moderating today's presentation. I'm delighted to be joined by our guest speaker, Cory Tiller, Product Manager from SPT Labtech. This webinar will explore the different levels of automation for sample management and will discuss the benefits from automating these processes. Following the presentation, we will have time for a question and answer session. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit these in the box to the right of your screen. So without further delay, I'd like to hand over to our speaker, Cory, and I'd like to thank them again for presenting for us today.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hi, I'm Cory. I work for SPT Labtech, and I'll be talking more about sample management, specifically how to really gain the most efficiency and what types of automation can help in your lab performance. So a little bit about everything today, but hopefully can provide some context throughout, starting with common pain points in sample management processes, then working our way into a tiered approach toward how to address certain workflow kind of automation techniques or strategies, talking a little bit about some of the SPT Labtech portfolio that can meet a scalable need for your workflows, and then kind of rounding it out with a bit about the benefits of sample management automation, which should kind of come throughout, and potential business justification to highlight towards the end on, how to actually navigate that conversation throughout. So common pain points. I think these will mostly be familiar to you all, but the main one that we see, and one of the large ones, is labware. There is a large variety of labware out there. There's glass, plastic, screw cap, septic cap. There's a flip cap tube on there. There's all kinds of variety that comes with labware, and really standardizing this portfolio of labware within a given lab can be quite challenging. There's reasons for all of them. Most of the time, there's not a real strong view towards standardization early in a company. It's more a get it done attitude. That makes a lot of sense for most companies, but as processes scale, it's very important to kind of take a step back and remember kind of as you scale, as you look to automation, what types of things are a little bit more automation friendly, like barcoding. 2D barcoding on the bottom on the screw cap tube is kind of becoming the standard automation all across the board. And really, it's important to try to expand consciously as you standardize workflows. But I think we're all fairly familiar with how labware can be both a real benefit and a real driver for the business, and also a challenge, depending on which stages and kind of how chaotic the full suite can be. Another challenge or pain point we see quite often in sample management is data tracking. I think I in my past have opened up a freezer and looked for a couple tubes and found some kind of handwritten notes on them, some better than others. In this case, the examples shown here are actually a little bit better description than I've seen on a lot of tubes in my day. So I think the process as a whole can be quite diverse. And really the data tracking throughout kind of leads to a more inventory-driven, standard-driven practice. So, or unorganized freezers, lack of inventory software can really cause problems in growth of a sample management business. And a really good step to starting this process, even before considering some software or some true inventory management, is just a standardized labeling practice, ideally a printed label, not handwritten, and then moving towards a sample registry software and inventory management software that can really drive that kind of change in your business. And I have a few software providers here. We at SPT Labtech work with all of them. We're fairly software agnostic, but we do have some that we've developed some more personal relationships with, some quicker driver design, that sort of thing. But one thing to note on the kind of clunky software engineer integrations point here is that ultimately the transition into a software product is not the most smooth. It can provide a whole host of benefits, but it really does need to be kind of said that it will have a clunky kind of transition period, a growth period. And it does sometimes feel like a always darkest before the dawn sort of scenario. But I know that one thing we recommend on top of automation-friendly tubes is a software product for inventory management, because it's oftentimes a bit of a secondary thought to sample registry in an organization. And the last main pain point that'll be a bit of a theme throughout here is manual work around sample management tasks. These are often fairly labor-intensive tasks, like hand picking tubes from freezers, hand routing tubes, hand sorting. It comes in all different aspects of the sample management suite, from kind of the larger blood banking aspects to even just the small cryo tubes and hand picking out of freezers. No one really enjoys it. It's quite a tedious task. And kind of feeding on the last line here, there are places where there's really high impact to mistakes in these processes. Transitioning the wrong tube can lead to poor run starts or batch processes. So definitely important to be consistent and to try to kind of maintain a sense of focus. For the folks that are familiar with blood banking here, there's a tube labeling aspect that can be quite painful. We have some of the do's and don'ts on the screen here, but also some examples of really poorly labeled tubes in blood collection. I know in a previous job, I was working in a testing facility for blood, and we simply couldn't test certain tubes samples if they were labeled incorrectly, because the downstream automation would not actually scan them. So it does have kind of a real world impact in this way. And then another example, just vial weighing. There are clinical, analytical laboratories out there. They're still doing a lot of hand weighing of samples pre and post dispense to get the real gravimetric values. And again, tedium, long and hours tasks, but still require quite a bit of focus in that kind of time scale. So again, just a whole suite of common pain points that I'll kind of talk through as we go, and how they relate to not just the products that we have, but how we can add a product here and there to really relieve some of this impact. All right, so talking through levels of automation, because there's not a one-size-fits-all solution out there. And so I'll talk through a kind of a tiered approach to automating sample management. And that's not to say you have to start at 1 and work your way to 5, or come in at a certain spot. It's really just to give a few examples of kind of how various automation fits could enable your business or your workflows. And really, it does come down to kind of what works best for you, which will be kind of another theme throughout the next set of slides. So why automation, and why kind of a tiered approach? Obviously, there are varied investment levels within automation. Kind of showing the different approaches can give a better insight into where that investment lies. Varied throughputs. There are full large-scale sample management organizations out there, and there are some quite small labs that are really, it's still high-impact work, but the throughput's just not quite the same. And one last thing here that I want to try to highlight is that this gives an example of a controlled jump. It's not the perfect way to go through this system, but It does show some examples of how you can jump from kind of a small level of automation and move throughout your kind of laboratory story, if you will, to a more automated solution. Lastly, I'll just mention that this is more focused around automated storage and workflows around automated storage or just simple sample storage, but not containing liquid nitrogen most of the time level samples. If there are questions that are specific to a certain kit or a certain kind of temperature zone, please ask at the end. So what does a mostly manual workflow look like, or a potential mostly manual workflow? In this case, this workflow is kind of from a starting point of tubes from storage going into a downstream process, which for most laboratories involves liquid handling. So in kind of a mostly manual workflow, there's still some things out there that can help enable kind of a start to that process. In this case, we're considering a screw cap set of tubes, different shapes and sizes, of course, are out there. This is just a representative kind of, well, small grouping. And so in this kind of area, you'll see things like scanners for getting data into a management system, both hand scanners, and in this case, we have a cryo scanner here that is another kind of option that's for fast kind of batch upload scanning. But capper decappers, again, this is screw cap related, but usually have to take the caps off, whether by hand or an automated solution. And again, everything kind of in laboratory focus most of the time ends up being in the liquid handling aspects. So whether hand pipetting or using bits of automation, we have to do something upstream of the sample to get to that automation step so that we can provide, those assay ready plates or test for diagnostic samples. Again, small bits of automation can kind of help streamline that process from the beginning. In this case, we're still using a very manual storage system. There's a bunch of types out there, just to give a highlight. Another potential example is kind of the inverse. Samples come in, whether they're in plate format or kind of a batch format. Broth could be upstream samples in blood tubes, and use the full suite here on the front end to introduce kind of a automation-friendly tube. We'll have the new tube come in to decap, the liquid handling to dispense into sample automation-friendly tubes. Tubes are recapped, scanned into your inventory management system, so data uploaded to hopefully data management software, but sometimes we see tracking in Excel. But anyway, the data is available and then stored into the final freezer. In this case, again, manual is the example. Manual freezing is very common and really is a bigger hurdle to jump into, or I guess out of would probably be the right way to put it, but it can be a real nice kind of complement to a very manual process, adding little bits of kit overall. All right. One or two more kind of lower level examples as we move kind of forward, but this kind of implements a kind of the next stage in this strategy. Is still kind of keeping the same theme. We have capping and decapping, some low level liquid handling. In this case, the upstream would be probably a plate or liquid handling upstream. There's a kind of suite of SPT Labtech liquid handlers here. It's just as an example of liquid handling inputs upstream. Tubes are decapped, aliquot from tube to plate or tube to tube in some cases, and then recapped. And in this case, we've kind of added another element that can help really leverage sample management workflows to more efficiency is the Excel tube handler. In this case, we could have it scan barcodes and label tubes. So it eliminates the need in this case to actually have a scanner but also does the tube labeling as well. Because as we mentioned, hand labeling tubes is not fun, and it can really add some consistency and some reliability in the labeling process before putting tubes into storage. In this case, the example is archival storage, but any temporary storage can be used as well. Again, trying to find places where using a small bit of automation can really help in the processes. And in my experience, for kind of a newer, smaller startup workflows, sample management can often be kind of left behind in the automation process because the upstream sample drivers, liquid handling processes, are usually the first to get investment. That's not always the case and can certainly vary dependent on company and industry, but it's worth noting that it can be a bit of an uphill battle. And kind of the final couple here on potential kind of more manual workflows, adding a bit of kit as we go, is another example of the Excel here. We have kind of an extraction normalization workflow upstream, probably part of an NGS process, where we go from plates into tubes. The tubes are then put into storage, so we can imagine this being kind of the bulk amount of samples going into the NGS process. They're then taken from storage, rearrayed, so cherry picking, resorting and rearraying into final customer order racks, as well as consolidated racks. So the consolidated racks you could see as being kind of a hits or leads consolidation, and really just another example of where that picking really takes another bit of pressure off the customer, or in this case, the user, because we're talking about, instead of hand picking, hand sorting, we use a bit of instrumentation to do that process. And kind of the last manual workflow I'll talk a little bit about leads into kind of where automated storage can come in, and that's starting from a manual storage kind of pre-screening workflow. So pulling out your tubes, samples that need to be then put into a screening workflow, cleaning process. Tubes are pulled out, thawed, scanned. In this case, data validation, cherry picked to their final array. This is in lieu of liquid handling cherry picking. Can cherry pick on Excel system, decapped, stamped from tubes into assay-ready plates for downstream screening workflows. Tubes can be then sent back to storage. And in this case, we've kind of added potential options for the volume check here, used for an inventory management check, just to kind of re-update inventory as we go in, recap, scan to validate, back into storage. So just another example of kind of how this could go, and one that's particularly useful in kind of considering all of these steps in a manual storage environment prior to kind of moving into automated storage. You'll see this kind of example again in a few slides. Talking about automated storage here for a moment, there are many options out there. SPT Labtech offers free, fairly unique solutions in that we have the compact, which is new, compound from the ambient to -20 temperature ranges, and Arctic for ultra low temperature freezing at -80. Just a kind of brief note on the storage here is that all vials that go into these stores are 9mm 96 format vials. They kind of various capacities ranging from roughly 50,000 vials all the way to 200,000 vial capacities, depending on the product. And one thing that's really unique about SPT Labtech here that it really drives differentiation is that we use pneumatic transport. So similar to the old bank telling systems, we use air to actually move tubes throughout the systems. This really pushes on the reliability of the system because we don't have mechanics in the cold zones that are susceptible to kind of shorter lives and breaking much faster. So it really does enable a much more reliable product using air. Again, just in general, automated sample management adds a data tracking element that's much more robust than manual storage, scales with workflows, And one other thing that's a little bit more unique about SPT Labtech in this case is we don't store the actual racks of samples, we store the tubes individually. This provides a really high storage density in a honeycomb format that really can kind of enable labs to get the most out of their footprint and walk up, simple vending machine kind of style. If you need a few tubes, walk up, type in the barcodes in the system, get what you need. So really removing that manual bit from storage and from kind of workflows around storage, we'll also get to in a moment, that really enable the most effective use of time. In this case, this could be technician's time, scientist's time, but when it comes to storage and picking and placing, everyone would rather do something a little bit more, I guess, fulfilling in the laboratory. So it does provide that extra layer of success. Talking a little bit more about Compact because it's a newly released product. We're trying to make kind of automated storage much more accessible to a larger crowd, larger workflows, because it can be a large barrier of entry getting into automated storage, just initial investment alone. So Compact comes in for the -20C or the 4C customer. Automated storage and retrieval, kind of simple, small lab-friendly footprint, fits in service elevators, through corridors, much easier to get into the building and much more flexible. We still use that pneumatic technology, that proven SPT Labtech pneumatic technology in the system based on kind of an existing platform. So we're not releasing something brand new to the market technology-wise. We're still using a proven, reliable technology. Still 9mm vial types, similar to Arctic and Compound. Around 50,000 1.4 mil vials is the capacity on that side. For the smaller vials, we have a scaling capacity. And the throughput, we can still match quite good throughputs for kind of the compound management customer on the lower end, where you're working with quite a few racks per day, at around 15 racks in, 15 racks out per day. It's around a little under 3,000 samples total. That comes with kind of unique SPT Labtech ability to integrate scale with your laboratory, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And the most important thing that I kind of mentioned already is it comes at a price point that we actually can get into a more diverse customer base and get customers really thinking about automated storage much earlier in the process, which we find, again, is valuable to the customer, but also valuable to the industry as a whole. So one thing that I kind of broke to talk about automated storage here, and coming back to similar to that screening workflow we saw in the past with manual storage, scanning, resorting with the XL 9 or 20 to tube pick and place reformat. We kind of brought in automated storage in that same workflow. And what you can see is, it's roughly cut in half, taken out quite a few steps here with automated storage, both doing the pre-sorting and the rearraying, as well as the data tracking. So it really can take away a few instruments in that process, which can also speed up the process. And sitting in roughly manual storage footprint, you don't really waste more space in this process. So again, we can get into the specifics of each instrument, but in this case, we're using the automated store to do the pre-sorting for us, go back into the downstream process and do just thaw tubes, decap into stamps for assay-ready plates. And really, that does save a lot of time for the small and large customer. We have customers all over the industries, some being very large-scale compound management customers that are doing the kind of large-scale screens, and some kind of on the smaller scale, but still that ability to reformat in an automated way and plug in almost directly into downstream processing can be quite a value add. And in some cases, you could also think of this as being a direct integration platform or a work cell, not separate bits of kit around the lab. Just ways to think about it. Much less manual touch points. One thing we have to kind of mention, because it exists and it's not an SPT Labtech product, but there are very large library automated storage solutions out there. These solutions are kind of usually for the larger scale operation, really high capacity systems, millions of samples typically. They're custom built for, well, built to order. They're custom built to shape, custom built to throughput typically, can be extremely large capacity and extremely large investment. These usually come with a lot of flexibility in kind of the design, but high-end investment, difficult to kind of get in the buildings. They have to be built on site. So it does take quite a bit of time to get them up and running. And then once they're running, they are essentially, kind of as shown, a large room. So they're not moving, they're not mobile, they can't scale as you move, as your business changes. It's a one-time kind of purchase in this case. Just to kind of highlight how another way you can look at it and kind of folding into that tiered approach we talked about earlier is SPT Labtech products, both compact and compound on the kind of higher temperature end and Arctic on the -80 end. They can scale with your business. So we consider them modular. You can add one or many to your workflow or building as you grow. In this case, a compact also has the ability to connect into a remote arrayer, but the compound has this kind of nice visual where you can connect up to 4 to a benchtop size input-output device, and really gives you that feel of a large-scale storage unit without actually needing the space, the upfront investment and planning, and really continues to keep a high throughput because you're being able to access 4 separate units at a time. It also provides kind of a nice peace of mind, bit of reliability and flexibility in that if you have issues with one unit, you can still use the other 3. Or if you want, you can also, which is probably better shown by Arctic, you can also separate the actual physical instruments from where you want to work with the samples in the lab. So this is an example of kind of a modular biobank where we've attached multiple Arctics to a single input-output device in a laboratory. And the Arctics can actually sit in the basement, they can sit in a completely different room, and we use pneumatic piping to route samples to their kind of actual input-output device. This is called the Connect AC, and this is temperature controlled as well. So samples can really move throughout buildings, throughout labs, with all through air. Again, it provides a lot more flexibility and a really unique feature to the industry to be able to achieve that. Kind of what I've also mentioned before that it fits in is if you want to add a work cell or a liquid handling integration, it's a really nice place to add it at the end here with that Connect unit being inside the work cell to be able to kind of even get more out of your integration, much more throughput, much more capacity. And again, something that scales with your business, not something you have to make the upfront investment all at once and then build upon. I guess the last kind of point to mention here is all of these units, compact, compound, and Arctic, they're all fairly mobile. So if you need to move because your site has changed, or as we hear so often these days, you built your forever home and it's a few streets away, we can always schedule moves to actually move the units when you're ready. So it does help to actually be more flexible in planning and provide a kind of full solution. The benefits of automated sample storage, I think we've talked a little bit about kind of different ways to think about it. Really, this is a nice kind of setup into kind of the business justification bit of this process. And really, you can come at it from a few angles, but one way to think about it is the intangible benefits and the tangible benefits. Tangible being, something that you can actually put a measure to, and cost savings or energy savings, and intangible being something a little bit harder to quantify, but provides a value that you can then really, push for in your business plan, or provides value that's necessary for your laboratory. Improve sample accessibility, so easier to find samples when you need them. The automation does looking for you. Data integrity, which is, it's always been a hot topic, but it's becoming more prevalent over time, is just the access, the accuracy of the data that you drive and generate, because ultimately we have to trust the data in our process. And if it's not well collated or collected, we can have a lot of trouble downstream in all industries and in all kind of areas of the business. And then kind of the one I'll talk a little bit more about next slide is the sample integrity. Again, you have to believe that your sample being in the freezer is going to stay viable for the longest potential amount of time. And you want to be able to trust that once the sample's in there, you get the most value out of it. So again, these are kind of difficult to put a price on, and really is customer specific. But the one thing to think about in this kind of context is, what is this worth to me? What benefit does this have to my organization? Talking a little bit more about sample integrity for intangible benefits, I'm going to talk a little bit about the penguin effect. So it's kind of an interesting thing to set up, funny name, but we did some testing profiles on sample storage in racks. So as opposed to kind of how we store them in direct in each tube. And what we found is that there actually is a significant insulation effect on the inner vials in a rack, as opposed to the outer vials, which means they can take a much longer to freeze. And it really depends on kind of the samples themselves and liquid fill, but you can have different freezing profiles for different placements of samples, which can affect the viability over time. And so, just to kind of explain this graph a little bit better, penguin effect is more about kind of how penguins insulate themselves with the clustering in close. But what we'll see is kind of as the outer sample, which is in red, as opposed to the inner sample, which is in purple, as time goes by, we recorded the temperature with probes. And what you can see, the biggest delta is the 70-minute difference between getting to minus 40 C with the red sample, the outer sample, and getting to minus 40 C with the purple. Again, this is where your business would have to decide how important that is to you, but it does show a significant difference in freezing profile in rack-based storage. And we had a similar test within our systems, and we don't see near the delta here. And again, for sake of time, I would plug that we have posters and white papers that go into this in a little bit more detail. But the opposite is shown to be true when a rack is pulled from the freezer, as well as when as opposed to just freezing. So on the way out, there is two different temperature profiles for the outside edge versus the kind of inside sample, which I think is a little bit more known in the industry, but it's important to note. And what you see or what you think you see might not be what you're actually getting on the sample viability. Tangible benefits, again, kind of set up the numbers. These are a lot more quantifiable. I think the top two being a little bit more fuzzy, but can be quantifiable: repeatability and reliability. Reliability is not easy to quantify. I mean, it's easy to quantify how reliable something is, but not the impact to your business. So you might see rework differently at different businesses, but that kind of rework cost is worth considering when generating this justification for automated storage. increased walkaway time. That leads to reduced labor costs, but it's important to kind of note that walkaway time, you might somewhat reduce the labor cost, but you also might enable a different workflow. So in smaller companies where you have kind of people wearing multiple hats, let's say, scientists might still be doing a decent amount of sample management. And if you give them more time away from the sample management, they have more time to do more meaningful work to your business. So thinking about it from both the aspect of just saving time and also enabling as you go. And then, of course, energy costs and energy savings are very tangible, and space savings both have a true cost dollar amount to them. Okay, so jumping into the business plan, I'm going to kind of caveat this a little bit with, this will be a very tight, quick look at potential business model and business justification. But again, if you want more information, more detail, there'll be some attached content in the webinar notes, as well as you can always reach out to us and learn more about how this could work for you. So just to set this up a little bit before jumping in, study was done with Arctic and -80 storage at a biobanking facility in the UK. And the idea was to compare the difference between manual storage operations, kind of the hands-on model, and automated retrieval processes. So real like-for-like comparisons where possible. So the study was conducted to establish average picking time at the UK Biobank at a manual area. And we really showed some different kind of pieces of that workflow and how well they were organized for a manual operation. But it's still worth noting that there are some kind of process level questions in a manual operation. One being the tidy model versus untidy model, which I'll explain. And the other being kind of, we'll factor in average pick time, because there's always a faster person or a slower person in most organizations. So we chose an average and used that to conduct the model that we'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide, but just to set up kind of tidy versus untidy. So the tidy model assumes the process is quite clean, no manual error, and no defragmentation. In this case, defragmentation means that as you pick something out of a store, there's that hole that happens, and in a fragmented store, you don't fill the holes. So in this case, you go back and fill in the slots you have, gives you the most file density. So that's the tidy model. Gives you more work time. You double the pick time to backfill those empty holes, but it does save you on space because you're not actually creating as much capacity problems. And the model assumes that freezers are at maximum capacity. A little bit more tricky in manual storage because the kind of suggested capacities mean that you're well organized and you don't have frosting and all the other things that come with manual storage. The untidy model is a much more inefficient process where racks are not refilled after picking. So you're creating more kind of capacity gap as you go. So this has some real negative effects on growth, because as you add more freezers, because you're hitting capacity much faster, you add more labor cost, electricity cost, and space costs. The labor, because someone's actually having to go to more places to look for samples as opposed to a kind of tighter capacity setup. So real quickly, we'll kind of look through these numbers just to kind of give you an idea. But we'll have both models, the tidy model and the untidy model. And the headers here, cost types are pretty straightforward, capital and service being the initial investment and the service contracts. Picking and labor is labor cost, electricity and space. So again, electricity costs of the actual freezers and the space that they take up. One thing to mention here, again, is the picks per week along the kind of x-axis is a relative value. How many samples are you actually picking per week And there's also kind of a factor in, which isn't represented here, but how many sessions of picking per week, because it does matter how many times you're opening and closing the freezers for that electricity cost. So just as a quick kind of pass through, the automation comparison we found for the similar model is around $730,000. So that's the kind of number to compare against. And this is a 10-year study. So it's factoring in 10 years of service cost and kind of the life of instruments over time. And so we see is kind of for the tidy model, as picks per week increase, we're kind of looking at the break-even point somewhere between 500 and 1,000 picks per week, with a couple 100,000 delta at the kind of high number of picks per week. With the untidy model, we reach that kind of 730 mark much faster. So a cost might be sunk much faster in a manual environment because we're adding capacity, which takes up space and costs more electricity as well as more labor. So we're kind of hitting those milestones much, much faster in an untidy model. Again, this is in this case, but it's a good way to look at it as you scale, as you add more, your kind of investment dilutes over time. So cost per sample comparison, kind of similar to what we just did, but more on a macro scale. So the 10-year manual storage comparison to automated storage, the average here is cost per sample for between the tidy and untidy model, kind of give a more realistic feel to it, because I don't think most labs are one bucket or the other, probably somewhere in the middle, which in most cases in life, the truth is somewhere in the middle. So just a quick comparison here, looking at some of the cost per sample differences over this 10-year span for this comparison model. We really see that as you really start to add picks per week, you do save on kind of real value over that 10-year time point for the larger kind of capacity storage, as well as higher picks per week. There's a bit of a change in point here because we add another large capacity store on automated store, so more initial investment to kind of overcome over time. But again, this model kind of extrapolates with some kind of peaks and valleys. It's worth kind of considering. And just as kind of an example, again, to consider for you is just because it's positive in certain cases, more expensive per sample to automate, doesn't mean it's not worth it to your business. So really kind of factoring in the intangible costs as well as the tangible to kind of meet your whole picture. We have, again, on our website, we have an ROI calculator for Arctic, so -80 storage, and an ROI calculator for compact that can be used to kind of quickly calculate this. And we kind of list the assumptions made, the real variables that are put in is mostly around picks per week and capacity. But it's a quite useful tool, and I encourage you all to, if you're considering automated storage, to test it out, see how it fits for you. Okay, so kind of a quick summary here, because we went through a lot in the time we had, and just a note on where I see this kind of fit, and whether you're really new to automation or you're really well established, there are solutions out there that can fit your business, fit your workflow for really increasing the efficiency, scalability, and sustainability of those processes. Much more out there than it seems sometimes for enabling sample management. And again, looking at that tiered approach, each step forward in a workflow can be very valuable, but should be carefully considered. And this is where you do that business justification. And you look for solutions that are kind of the right investment for your labs. And this is really why we released Compact, is we want more labs to value automation at a much earlier time period in their kind of trajectory. So get the solution out there that fits you. And really, when you're doing that justification, can't stress enough that you have to make kind of an effort to consider both the tangible and intangible benefits. Sometimes cost upfront can be a very difficult hill to crest, but the intangible benefits of automation can really provide a lot of value to your business. All right, thank you for joining today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I will open it up for questions. Anything that you need, you can find kind of on our website, sptlabtech.com, and don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you for that very informative presentation. It's now time for our question and answer session. So if you have any further questions, please do send those in. You can submit these by typing into the questions box on the right of your screen. We've had a few questions in. So to start off with, Cory, given your experience, when is the right time to automate sample storage?
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. I think it does kind of depend on the business, but I think one thing that can be a good starting point is kind of having an automation ready tube and moving towards kind of an automated workflow. So getting kind of the labware in line for automation is a crucial key point. And then another key factor is usually some sort of inventory management will help as well, some software-based inventory management. It's not to say that you can't automate prior to that. We've seen, as I mentioned, kind of Excel spreadsheets and that sort of thing really work, but it really, there's no wrong time to start automation.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that for us. We've had another question in here. Can Arctic compound integrate with my other pieces of laboratory automation, and what about software integration?
Yes, I think that's it comes up quite a bit about software specifically, but as far as kind of hardware integrations, using those Connect remote arrayers or kind of input-output devices, we've managed to kind of really push the work cell hardware integration angle. And I think it's something very unique to the market as well. So we have customers kind of globally that have kind of integrated large bits of automation around those connects. And then from the software perspective, we partner with companies like Tishan. We've had multiple integrations with Dotmatics. In this case, it's more of a file-based transfer or a network folder sweep. But we have a lot of experience in that kind of integration and can easily set you up with that software integration bit.
Great, thank you. We've had another question here. You may have slightly answered it there, but please could you comment on integration of Dotmatics inventory with SPT storage inventory?
Yeah. Dotmatics specifically, I know is kind of, it's used quite often in the inventory management side. And we do have references, plenty of customer references that have used Dotmatics and integrated directly with Compound and Arctic. And will be a similar kind of integration to Compact as the kind of actual file transfer or data transfer is very similar on the Compact side. So we would kind of take it case by case, but ultimately we have references and plenty of comfort with Dotmatics.
Great, thank you. So the next question we've had in here, what storage vessels are compatible with Arctic, Compact or Compound?
Yeah, so I did highlight it, but it is important kind of for the SPT Labtech hardware to mention that in our case, we are only automating the storage of the 96 format samples. So they're the 9mm tubes. So they're commonly, found in the industry, of course, because they stamp easily into plates, but we don't have the capacity to storage kind of larger format tubes in automated ways or work with plates. But we do sell, as I kind of mentioned, the XL systems are much more compatible with larger labware, different types of labware. So we can still bring automation to kind of the larger labware bucket, but not automated storage.
Excellent. So we are going to wrap it up there. I'd like to thank our expert speaker, Cory, for the informative presentation and discussion, and a big thank you to everyone for joining us online. We hope you found this a worthwhile session. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email me at editor@selectscience.net, and I will follow up with your questions for our speaker. Remember, you can download related resources in the tab to the left of your screen, and this includes the certificate of attendance. If you'd like to listen again to today's webinar or invite a friend to listen, it will be available to watch on demand in just a few days. Goodbye, and thank you once again for joining us.